And let's bring you the live coverage of the midterm polls as is being covered by ABC. Let's cut live to ABC now.
That we've heard from so many Republicans in this cycle that they're the ones who will say pre-existing conditions. If he wins tonight, he will have been successful in making that argument. And when you look at Florida, Donald Trump's approval rating in Florida, we keep coming back to this number. Let's just see if it's been refreshed tonight. 51% of the voters are turned out in Florida. Remember, he won this by just 1%, about 100,000 votes over Hillary Clinton. But more than half of the voters in Florida like what they're seeing from Donald Trump. And Rick Scott's been careful about embracing President Trump. But one thing he did do on his own was to take 8 trips to Puerto Rico. President Trump was highly criticized for his response to Maria. Rick Scott was very careful. He knew that a lot of the displaced American citizens from Puerto Rico would play a role in this election, and he was careful to show them that he cares, too, about Puerto Rico.
And Press Secretary Sarah Sanders was just asked for her thoughts on Florida, and she said, I think a lot of credit will go to President Trump if, in fact, they pull off a victory there because he has been there to campaign for them, both in the governor and the Senate race. But one thing we are not talking about right now is the overtones of race and racism that have played out in the governor's race there with the comments like monkey this up by DeSantis and Gillum saying, I'm not calling him a racist. The racists believe he's a racist. And, of course, one of President Trump's more controversial tweets in this election cycle when he waited and called Gillum a thief without any evidence.
Byron Pitts, Gillum laughed off those attacks with a smile. He is a new face for the Democratic Party. It doesn't appear yet, at least, that he brought in enough new voters.
George, that's exactly right. And I think for many progressives in places like Florida and Georgia, they'll be incredibly disappointed, and they'll be giving their white neighbors the hairy eyeball tomorrow, right? Because there was this narrative in places like Georgia and Florida where he thought there's this picture painted of President Trump, fair or unfair, that for many people he's seen as someone who's anti-minority, right? And so there were people who felt that in the case of Florida, we have a black man running for governor. He's the mayor of the capital city of the state, progressive, liked by many people, that there might be a new South, a new Florida. This is an indication that
Gillum did not run as a centrist candidate. When Barack Obama ran for president, there's no red, blue America. There's only one America. Gillum ran as a fairly radical left-of-center progressive in a state that didn't like him. Didn't like that kind of politics. He tried to overcome it with personal charm and charisma, but a lot of voters, I think, said, look, it might have told pollsters, we don't want to look racist, but this guy may be just too left of center for us.
Yeah. Take a look at Florida, Texas, and Indiana. All look like they're headed to be all Republican again. We always talk about Miami or Indianapolis or Austin or Dallas or Houston or El Paso. These are states with a large amount of small town and rural voters still, a huge amount. And it looks like from the returns, they voted overwhelmingly. And this has been a trend. And as the suburban areas are moving, and we see from the House races, more Democratic, the rural and small town areas of these states are moving increasingly more Republican.
In very different directions, Cookie Roberts.
Yes, but you also see in this Florida Senate race that the Hispanic vote is much less for the Democrat than it is in the nation as a whole. And so those trips to Puerto Rico probably made a big difference. The fact that the Hispanic voters were not vilified in any way, were in fact courted, made a difference. But we are seeing very different states in different ways. The bottom line is that in these polls, even though the number of liberals was up to about 27%, that's only 27%.
Let's go to Whit Johnson in Tallahassee.
Many of these coming in and at 11.
Yeah, George, I just wanted to pick up on what Cookie Roberts was saying about the Hispanic vote here. It is now 16.4% of the voting demographic here in the state of Florida and growing. But as Cookie mentioned, that is a demographic that is changing within the demographic, and in large part due to the tens of thousands of Puerto Ricans who have relocated here after Hurricane Maria. The estimates ranging from 50 to 75,000. It still remains to be seen how they would ultimately vote and if they would come out and vote. Of course, U.S. citizens, they're able to register and vote here in the state of Florida. But I also wanted to mention this. We're getting some information from our decision desk. We talked about how the vote across the state for both the Senate and the governor, too close to call. And at this point, it's looking like if that margin stays within 1%, then we couldn't make a projection on that. Also, remember, if the margin is a half a percentage point or less, there would be an automatic recount. Not sure if that's in fact going to be the case, but if there was any concern about the early returns, you certainly wouldn't notice it here at the Gillum headquarters here at Florida A&M University. It is still a party-like atmosphere, and this is the exact crowd that Democrats were hoping to get out. A largely African-American voting bloc, also youth, the college vote. They have been mostly dormant in elections in the past, in the major elections here. They were hoping, the Democrats, that they would turn out to vote. But I can't tell you enough how much Rick Scott and all those visits to Puerto Rico, speaking in English and Spanish, how much that could have an impact on the new growing Hispanic population here.
Okay, Whit Johnson, thanks very much. Before we go to break, let's check in on a couple of other Senate races that we're not ready to project yet. That's the state of Arizona right there, where Kristen Sinema up against Martha McSally. They're in the state of Arizona. It's a close one, Meghan McCain.
And again, you know, this is the one that I am looking forward to the most, to hearing what's going to happen. I don't think you can underestimate some of the clips that have come out of Kristen Sinema in the past few weeks of her saying disparaging remarks about Arizona. She referred to Arizona as being the meth lab of democracy, and Arizona in sort of a negative way. And it was the type of thing that my brother called me about and a lot of my friends called me about. And I think the reminder that at one point in time, Kristen Sinema was a Code Pink protester that sort of moderated towards the middle ended up hurting her. She's a great campaigner. I would say a better campaigner than Martha McSally. But if Martha McSally wins, I echo what we said earlier, that it is because of Doug Ducey.
We're not ready to call that one yet. We are ready to project a House seat in the state of Illinois, where Sean Casten, the Democrat, has defeated Congressman Peter Roskam, going for his 7th term there in the state of Illinois. This one the Democrats had their sight on this one for a long time. John Carl, again, one of those in the range of they had to win to get to their 23.
Yes, and also another one of those moderate Republicans gone. Another sign, we've seen many of them already tonight, that moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats are leaving the Congress.
Going to take a break. We'll be right back.
You're watching ABC News Live. I'm Dan Harris up in the skybox, our perch overlooking the main set here at ABC News headquarters in New York. Let's take a look at some of the results that are coming in as this evening progresses. And we start with a look at where we on the main broadcast. The Democrats have picked up 14 seats. The magic number tonight, 23. If they get to that number, they can regain control of the House of Representatives, but that has not yet happened. Also at this hour, we're looking at the battle for the Senate, and thus far, ABC News is projecting, not thus far, full stop, ABC News is projecting the Republicans will retain control of the Senate. In Florida, there's a big governor's race we've been watching. We're at this point not making a projection, but 99% of the votes have been reported. And Andrew Gillum, the Democrat, who had been leading the polls going into this race, at this point trailing the Republican Ron DeSantis. This has been a very closely watched, racially charged race. And at this point, the Democratic mayor of Tallahassee running behind. Also in Florida, we're seeing Rick Scott, the sitting governor, is running for a Senate seat there, pulling a bit of a wider lead over the incumbent Democrat Bill Nelson. Another reason why things are looking not so great for the Democrats in the United States Senate. Moving on now, we've got another board here from the state of Michigan, District 13. We're calling it, we are projecting for Rashida Tlaib, who will become the first Muslim woman to serve in the United States Congress. So history made in Michigan. Speaking of history, we are seeing record engagement, record money pouring in, and record turnout for this midterm in 2018. Hanging over it all, of course, the president, Donald J. Trump, a polarizing figure. So let's get it over to Kenneth Moton, ABC's Kenneth Moton, who's been following what's happening on social media. Kenneth, what are you seeing and hearing?
Reaction, Dan, to some of those races we've been projecting here throughout this evening here. And let's get right to the board. You've got Michael, who says, Cruz, Ted Cruz wins. A lot of exclamation points there. Mr. Beto put up a good fight. Big props to his vigor, enthusiasm. Best wishes to Mr. O'Rourke. So some bipartisan, some congratulatory remarks there and tweets that we're getting for the race that Beto run. But obviously for Ted Cruz, a big night for him. So you've got Josh here saying hashtag Beto, luck next time. Better luck next time. A little play on words there. Moving on, you've got Yadira who says, I'm sorry we failed you, Beto O'Rourke. So a lot of people there who were part of that high voter turnout in Texas, a red state that was hoping to flip to blue in that Senate race there. But Daisy saying maybe Beto O'Rourke 2020. So some people and fans and supporters of Beto already moving forward. Before I get back to you, Dan, I want to show you here that Heidi Heitkamp also getting a lot of love for her Kavanaugh vote, voting against him, but people really supporting her there, saying that she fought a good fight there in North Dakota.
Kenneth Moten, thank you very much, watching social media for us tonight. As we've said throughout the evening, when our friends downstairs on the main broadcast go to break, we'll pick it up and give you more information and analysis. For now, I'm Dan Harris up in the skybox. Downstairs to George.
ABC News election headquarters here in New York. That's a look at what's happening in the House tonight in these midterm elections. So far, a lot of votes yet to come in. Democrats have picked up 14 seats. They need 23 to take control. Different story in the Senate tonight. Republicans have added to their majority so far, picking up 2 seats, the seats in Indiana and North Dakota. Also want to take a look at another red state right now where a Democrat is fighting for her life, Claire McCaskill in the state of Missouri. We're not ready to project that yet, but what you see there, Josh Hawley is now leading over Claire McCaskill as she was seeking to hold on to her seat in a very, very tough state for Democrats. John Carl, she's come from behind before. This one's tough.
This one's really tough. This is a state that President Trump, then Donald Trump, won by 19 points. He's been there 5 times. He was there yesterday. He's campaigned hard. And she has a much stronger opponent. She had a deeply, deeply flawed opponent, you remember, 6 years ago. Much stronger opponent now.
We're going to come back to Missouri, but we have a call in the state of Ohio, governor's race in the state of Ohio right now, where the Republican, Mike DeWine, has defeated Richard Cordray, a veteran of the Obama administration, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Mike DeWine, Attorney General of the state of Ohio, has won. He's replacing Governor John Kasich, who's term limited, a critic of President Trump. Mike DeWine, an ally of President Trump. Big win there, Chris Christie, for the Republicans.
It's a huge win tonight, George. That race was really in doubt. I know folks at the Republican Governors Association were really concerned up to this weekend about which way that was going to go. And as we talk about 2020, having Mike DeWine as the governor is a much better option for Donald Trump than Richard Cordray. And so Mike DeWine, big win for him and a big win for the president.
And Ohio, Matthew Dad, always such a key in presidential elections.
Yeah, for years and years it was. But as we saw in this last election, a very close election, Donald Trump won it by 10 points. So it's beginning to move away from the swing status. And as we see in a year where Democrats did very well nationally, they weren't able to pick up the governor's race in Ohio.
Yet, Anna Cox, one of the things we saw is that in the Senate and the House, in the governor's race in the state of Ohio, going in very, very
a lot of split-ticket voters.
Yeah, and I also think that we're seeing sort of a sequel to 2016 in some ways here, where you have the Democrats kind of running up their vote totals in the urban areas and in cities, and then, you know, the Republicans just doing the same in rural areas. And we're seeing this divide between urban and rural America, this demographic problem. But also, I feel like I need to point out, a majority of Americans live in these places that are blue. And we're seeing kind of a restless blue majority and a very vocal red minority that happens to have a megaphone present in the White House.
And looks like we're heading to a split right now.
Candidates matter, George. Candidates matter. And, you know, the candidate against Senator Sherrod Brown, not nearly as good a candidate as Mike DeWine. Candidates still matter in these races above demographics and everything else. Not a good candidate, you're not going to win.
Claire McCaskill in Missouri, I want to get back to that right now, has been a good candidate, but this one may be too tough for her. We're going to go back to Deborah Roberts in Missouri right now. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? Well, we're not hearing Deborah Roberts, which is too bad, right there. Tom, why don't you go up to the board and show where the vote's coming in right now?
Yeah, we were talking about those two Americas, the divide. Look at Missouri. This is what Claire McCaskill's up against right here. Look at all this red, George. It's going to be very, very hard. One of the reasons why we haven't called this race just yet is because a lot of the vote in both St. Louis County and the city of St. Louis right next door has not come in. Claire McCaskill, Senator McCaskill is doing very well there. But if we go just further south to the suburbs of St. Louis, Jefferson, this is a county that went for Obama and then flipped to Trump. Hawley's up there. We go to the exurbs of St. Louis. Same thing, a county that went for Obama, then flipped to Trump, Washington County. Hawley's back up there. It's going to be very tough for Claire McCaskill. When you look at this sea of red in a state like Missouri, it's an uphill battle.
And George, so much of this race is going to come down to the issue of race gets at the issue that Republicans were trying to walk this fine line here. Claire McCaskill trying desperately to keep this race focused on that issue. She knows that healthcare is the top issue for voters in America, especially in that state. But her opponent, Josh Hawley, trying to walk this fine line, on one hand saying that he wants to repeal Obamacare. As the state attorney general, he signed on to this lawsuit that would gut protections for pre-existing conditions. But at the same time, he's saying he wants to keep those protections separate and apart from Obamacare. It gets at this bigger issue that we've seen playing out in races across the country and really raises some concerns for Republicans. How are they going to walk that fine line? What are they going to do? Because ultimately, they don't actually have a plan.
Well, John Carl, that's going to get to the question for Congress coming back. You know, that lawsuit is going to proceed. If it strikes down Obamacare, Congress is going to have one big issue on their plate.
Absolutely, and the Republicans absolutely own that. And this is, I want to come back to this theme of the moderates, especially in the Senate. McCaskill, you know, a moderate to left, Heidi Heitkamp, moderate to conservative, Joe Donnelly, moderate to conservative, all, you know, we'll see what happens with McCaskill, but could all not be coming back.
Yeah, every one of those candidates, David, also tried to hug President Trump in some ways, even though they were opposing him on other issues. You can't be halfway on that issue.
Claire McCaskill even said, I've sided with Donald Trump on 48% of the things he's offered his opinion on. I mean, this is the kind of language that she was using in the end. In the very end of this race, she literally at town halls was asking people to stand up if they have a pre-existing condition or if they have a loved one with a pre-existing condition, to drive home the point that her opponent was one of these who signed on to this lawsuit against Obamacare. But Josh Hawley did something very smart of his own with his ad about his 5-year-old son, who they said they learned not long ago had a pre-existing condition and that he would fight to save them. But look at some of the exits coming in from Missouri. This is what Claire McCaskill's really up against. President Trump's job performance, half of the state very happy with what they're seeing so far. When you look at the issues in Missouri, health care is issue number one. I'm going to break it down for you. Pre-existing conditions. Look at this. They even believe in that state that the Democratic Party would do a better job with pre-existing conditions. But this is a state where Trump won by 18 points. That's what Claire McCaskill's up against. And one last thing I want to show you. When it comes to the Brett Kavanaugh vote, she voted against Brett Kavanaugh. 40% said it was an important factor. But again, George, this is a red state where a Democratic senator is trying to hold on, paying a price for the Kavanaugh vote, because when you broaden out, look at the national perspective, only 43% of voters who turned out today support Brett Kavanaugh, 48% oppose. It's really in these red states.
And immigration also became an issue for her towards the end because she ended up hugging Donald Trump on that, essentially endorsing his policies on the border, saying, I don't want, he basically ended up saying, oh, I hear the chime. I'm going to stop. Chime.
And you're hearing it because we have a call in the state of New York where the Democrat Anthony Brindisi, New York 22, has defeated the Republican Claudia Tenney. She was seeking a second term, another important pickup for the Democrats, John Carl, in the state of New York.
Yeah, and this is in deep red territory, even though it's New York. This is a district that Donald Trump won by 15 points, George. This is like Staten Island, another sign that the Democrats are winning in a district that Donald Trump dominated. What the Democrats did to the theme of candidates matter is they nominated a moderate. Anthony Brindisi is somebody who had an A rating from the NRA. Now, as this got tight, they switched him to an F in the end. But this was somebody who was very much a blue dog Democrat.
And we have another switch coming in from the state of Florida, the House in Florida. Debbie Mercosur-Powell in Florida 26 has defeated Congressman Carlos Curbelo, who is seeking a third term there in Florida. This was a pure toss-up, Cecilia Vega.
Yeah, it certainly was. And Curbelo, of course, weighed in on President Trump after he threatened to end the policy on birthright citizenship. So this has been an interesting race to watch. And we are now seeing Democrats sweep every single district that went for Clinton.
Got to stop now. We're going to pause so the rest of the nation can join us.
This is an ABC News election update. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
And ABC News can now project that Democrats will win enough seats to gain control of the House. Democrats will pick up at least 23 seats in the House. We've included in our calculations several seats with later closing times, which we believe will not affect the outcome, but we are prepared to project right now that Democrats will take control of the House of Representatives. So we are heading for a split decision. We have a split decision this evening in the 2018 midterm elections. Republicans will keep the Senate. John Carl, Democrats will take the House.
Yeah, this is a whole new ball game. I mean, even though this is a split decision, it is not the kind of blue wave. The Democrats will now control every committee in the House of Representatives. So those committee chairs that were defending the president, that were where going after his allies will suddenly be investigating him and be investigating his administration, possibly even his business dealings. But because this is a split decision, I think there's a real danger of Democrats overplaying their hand, because we have seen Republicans do very well in the Senate races. They will have a bigger majority in all likelihood in the Senate and do better than expected in the governor's races. The country was divided in this election, and the Congress will be divided
Mary
to reflect
Bruce,
that.
you cover the House every day. The Democrats will take the chairmanship of important committees, Oversight Committee, Intelligence Committee, perhaps the most important of all, the Judiciary Committee.
They are going to investigate everything, essentially. They are not afraid to go and check this administration. Many Democrats that I've talked with feel that this administration has been allowed to operate unchecked by the current chairmen, the current Republican chairmen. That will now come to a screeching halt. They are going to investigate everything from the president's tax returns to possible Russia collusion to conflicts of interest. They're going to look at what the president has done with his agenda so far. There is a real political danger, though, for Democrats in doing this. They are going to have to show that they can legislate and not just investigate. And Democrats I've talked with are well aware of that. They are likely to pass some legislation early on, especially something maybe dealing with corruption in government. They know that they need to send a message that there's a new sheriff in town.
Okay, Mary Bruce, thanks very much. Democrats have taken control of the House of Representatives. ABC News can project. We've also projected that the Republicans will keep control of the Senate here in the 2018 midterm elections, a split decision. We'll be right back.